Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The fate of Obamacare is in the hands of a Texas judge who heard a case brought by a group of 20 Republican-led states who argue when Congress eliminated the penalty for not having health insurance as part of last year's tax bill, lawmakers rendered the entire Affordable Care Act unconstitutional. So they've asked the judge to block the health care law. Core principles of Obamacare, including protections for people with pre-existing medical conditions and limits on how much older Americans can be charged, are at issue here. Joining me now is one of the 20 Republican attorneys general on that lawsuit, Jeff Landry, who's the Attorney General of Louisiana. Sir, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Good morning.
Texas AG Ken Paxton last week argued that it should be the states, not the federal government, who should be responsible for forcing insurance companies to cover pre-existing conditions. Do you agree?
Well, look, let's take ourselves back to why we're having this discussion in the first place. We go back to 2005, 2006. We had a health insurance crisis, not a healthcare system crisis. Instead of fixing the insurance market, which Republicans were always for, the Democrats decided to try to retool our entire healthcare delivery system. And of course, that's the problem that we face today. We've seen this experiment. It's done nothing but raise premiums, cost government billions upon billions more in dollars. And the law was always flawed.
So a number of Americans would agree with you. Obamacare is divisive. Democrats have been saying for years now, yes, it needs to be fixed. But the question that I pose is that the Texas AG is saying part of the issue here is that when it comes to pre-existing conditions, which we know are incredibly important to Americans, they have strong, broad support, that the decision of whether or not insurance companies should have to cover them should be left up to the states. Do you agree?
Yeah, I believe the Republican Party has always taken a position that we would like to prohibit insurance companies from penalizing citizens for pre-existing conditions or using some sort of age as a determining factor. We believe that by engaging the marketplace, by ripping down the barriers, by adding more competition into the marketplace, you'll lower those particular premiums. Remember, Bush introduced health savings accounts. The Obamacare eliminated that. He eliminated catastrophic plans, all things that would help make the market more competitive, thereby giving us an opportunity to eliminating the pre-existing condition issue and then taking it off the table. But the party has always supported.
So are you saying the market will just figure it out? But I just want to make sure I follow you, sir. So you're saying that then if this was left up to the states, that competition would essentially allow this to figure itself out and that people with pre-existing conditions wouldn't have to worry. But is there not something that you plan to do in the state of Louisiana that would guarantee coverage for people with pre-existing conditions? This is something that 75% of Americans support.
Well, absolutely, and I think the party has always supported. In fact, I think all of the Republican candidates
right,
around
but then
the
what
country who are both
specifically in your
running at the
state,
federal
sir,
and
would
the
the
state
plan
level.
be? What would the plan be in the state of Louisiana?
Well,
ensure
I think
coverage?
that would be something for the legislature. Well, I think that would be a debate of which we'd have at the Capitol, and the legislature.
But is there a
would make
plan?
that
I mean, have you had those
determination.
conversations?
But
you're right there. You say you agree with the Texas AG, and this is what he was arguing last week. You're part of this lawsuit. You know, and listen, you're right. There are plenty of people who say, yes, we don't want the federal government to control this. But is there a plan in your state? Have you spoken with lawmakers? If, in fact, you're victorious here, what is that plan? I mean, there are, nearly 850,000 non-elderly adults in the state of Louisiana with pre-existing conditions. What's your message to them in terms of their guarantee of coverage?
Well, the message to them is that, look, once this law would fail, once it's found to be unconstitutional, that by bringing down the barriers, by bringing competition into the states, by ripping down the barriers from state by state and allowing healthcare insurers to compete, by bringing more competition into the market, you're going to lower those particular premiums, and as you're doing that, you're regulating the marketplace. Again, that's what we've always said from the beginning, not this type of universal healthcare plan, which has done nothing but been a drain both on the state and the federal
We only have 30
coffers.
seconds, sir, but just to be clear, there is not an exact plan to ensure that those with pre-existing conditions will continue to be guaranteed coverage in the state of Louisiana. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. I would disagree with that. I believe that there are many legislators.
But it sounds to me like there's not a
I
plan. All you're saying is competition is going to figure it out.
I'm not the legislature. I'm the Attorney General, making sure that we abide by the rule of law.
It is Tuesday, the 11th of September of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. That's right, a little bit of hot Hungarian paprika. Don't ever put the Old Bay in the chowder. The Old Bay is for the clam bake. All right, let's make sure we understand that. Old Bay, clam bake. Though I don't think there's going to be much of a clam bake along the southern eastern seaboard, making its way up to the north. Yeah, you might want to stay away from the tidal zones. Yep, looks like flow's increasing, and I take care. And I'm not talking about flow on the Progressive Insurance ads, though that's a danger in and of itself to more than just the eastern seaboard. Yep. Well, everybody's got to have work, and I'm glad that she does. That's good. Well, it is a day today that we shouldn't ever forget, and we won't. Of course, Trump's first tweet today, of all days, was not about that day. It was about the hoax of the Russia investigation and implications on why he has to get rid of that Russia expert in the FBI, Bruce Orr. I mean, obviously, if that guy's a Russia expert and bringing down Russia oligarchs and Russia and laundering money, he's an enemy of the state. What's a few buildings falling down by jets flying into them when you have somebody like that trying to ruin your day? That's who we got, and that's who we're going to get stuck with if we don't take care. And I mean by going out in mass numbers on these midterms, because they can only work the margins. Indeed. Well, it looks like 20 GOP attorneys generals are suing to again allow those insurance companies to reject people with pre-existing conditions. That's how we started off our day. It's all part of disaster capitalism, really is what it is. You have a tragedy, and then you try to ram through all the policies and ideas because people are at their weakest at that point. They usually are. They're in grief or shock. What else is on the rest of the menu today in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Well, on the rest of the menu, there's a lot unsaid in the State Department statement about closing that Palestinian office in D.C. I mean, who needs diplomacy when you got more than a big stick? An Orange County, California high school football game erupted in controversy as Trump-loving students lobbed racist taunts at their league rivals. Hey, it's Orange County. It's to be expected, isn't it? And immigrant children have been held for months to more than a year in Chicago detention facilities operated by Heartland Human Care Services. Well, then we leave the Bistro Cafe after the break and move right to the chef's table, where a stunning new report has revealed how Russians are weaponizing health information. You don't think that the anti-vaccine movement came out of a vacuum now, do you? And antibiotic-resistant superbugs are getting deadlier. As well they should. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. I really considered not spending too much time on the aspects of this day and what it meant 17 years ago. But it is a day that's seared in my consciousness, and I can't escape it. It's not as if there were other experiences that were less searing. I would say that this day had as equal of an impact on changing my life. The dates of demarcation. How many times can a heart be broken? How many times can a resolve be tested? Is this the meaning of life? To be reminded at the most unexpected time of pain and impermanence. How many times? I hear the voices of those whose memories of lost innocence are etched with the precision of a calendar on the stone of history. Jack London remembered the Boxer Rebellion. Jack Reed recalled more than 10 days. Hemingway remembered a hospital in Italy. Salinger talked of Dresden's fiery face. Our grandparents think of the 7th of December, while others recall a day in Dallas, a balcony in Memphis, a hotel in L.A. How many more times? How many more generations will be born into this impending loss? How many more incidents of horror before the last vestige of innocence is carried away? Now, these questions may seem on the surface to be a plea. But how many more times? How many more images of a woman, her dress blown in a fall among glass, concrete, steel, fire? Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice the chat room link at the rightish of the page, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Do check in with her. She does require a few more funds to finalize her upgrades on hardware and software to continue Resistance Radio as it was meant to be resisting. To the leftish of the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com are the contribute buttons, button, donate, contribute button for Netroots Radio, because your generosity keeps the lights a-blinking here. And we are unable to do this without you, so thank you for that. Do follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, at Netroots Radio. Check us out over on Facebook. You can follow me on Twitter, at Justice Putnam. I also post the show notes and links diary with all the show notes and links and even more on Daily Co's, where I can be found as Justice Putnam. Follow the show on Facebook. We're over there at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And on Twitter, we are at Cookbook West. And West Coast Cookbook is called Cookbook West on Twitter. And yeah, my mistake. I apologize. You can get podcasts of the show by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, YouTube, etc., etc., etc. All right, first offering here in the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays is by D. Pravaz, out of Think Progress. The U.S. State Department announced on Monday, that was yesterday, that it will shut down the Palestinian Liberation Organization's office in Washington, D.C., saying the delegation had, quote, not taken steps to advance the start of direct and meaningful negotiations with Israel. The statement also slammed the PLO for being critical of a, quote, U.S. peace plan they have not yet seen, end quote, one that is anticipated to be announced by Donald Trump at the UN General Assembly in New York later this month. He's going to bang a shoe on the podium. You just know he is. The U.S. continues to believe that direct negotiations between the two parties are the only way forward. This action should not be exploited by those who seek to act as spoilers, to distract from the imperative of reaching a peace agreement. God, that sounds like John Bolton. Think Progress contacted the PLO's office in D.C. for comment, but did not receive a response. Of course, much has been left unsaid in the State Department statement. The U.S. is no longer seen as an impartial peace broker by Palestinians after Trump decided to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, thereby unilaterally declaring the disputed territory as the Jewish capital. The Trump administration also condemned Palestinians for protesting at the Gaza border fence for several weeks earlier this year and blamed them for getting shot by Israeli snipers in the deadliest escalation in the rest of territory since the 2014 war. That was so long ago, wasn't it? Gee. Having already pulled out of two key UN bodies it considered too biased against Israel, UNESCO, and the UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO. Can you believe that? Okay. The Trump administration late last month announced it was cutting off funding to the UNRWA, the UN agency overseeing needs of over 5 million Palestinian refugees, recognizing only 10% of the current refugee numbers, because refugees are the scourge of the earth. Those people are pushed out because of violence and pestilence and all the tragedy wrought by human endeavor to destroy one human over another. They should have just stayed there and took it. Yeah. He doesn't like losers, right? He doesn't like people who give up. We'll see about that. In a statement published on his website on Monday, Chief Palestinian Negotiator Sarah Erekat responded to news of the closure. This is yet another affirmation of the Trump administration's policy to collectively punish the Palestinian people, including by cutting financial support for humanitarian services, including health and education. We reiterate that the rights of the Palestinian people are not for sale, that we will not succumb to U.S. threats and bullying, and that we will continue our legitimate struggle for freedom, justice, and independence, including by all political and legal means possible. Accordingly, we continue to call upon the International Criminal Court to open its immediate investigation into Israeli crimes. Of course, before the Conservative Federalist Society yesterday, Bolton said that the U.S. will use any means necessary to defend itself and its allies against what he said were the International Criminal Court's unjust prosecution. And he actually extended it to any soldier fighting in Afghanistan who may be charged with a war crime. That means that we declare war on The Hague. Again, of a raw story brings us this next offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And now a small journalistic confession. I did live for a considerable time growing up in North Orange County, California, known as the Republican red capital of the world. So it has a long history of a particular kind of virulent racism. I mean, John Schmitz. Look him up. Yeah, he had quite a daughter, too. Look her up. It's something about them. I don't know. They're just weird people. Yeah, I'm not talking about the Schmitz alone. Over the weekend, a California high school football game exploded in controversy after the principal of one high school noticed pro-Trump and racist signs. Jeff Bishop, principal of Santa Ana High School, posted about the alarming behavior on Facebook. A little bit of background here. Santa Ana High School has always been known as, the Mexican high school, to put it mildly. It would have been easy to blame the loss of the game on the racist welcome the Saints received as they walked into the stadium and read the posters referencing Trump, "We love white," "Build the wall," and various other politically and racially charged statements he wrote. The Santa Ana High School student body is predominantly Hispanic, reports the Orange County Register. Students at Aliso Niguel High School are mostly, you guessed it, white. He also heard spectators shout, "USA, USA," as if the teams were from different countries. Well, I got to tell you, I've talked to a few of these MAGA hatters, and that's exactly how they believe. After hearing chants from the student section, cheering USA, USA, USA after the first two touchdowns, morally, I could not ignore it anymore after talking to the principal and watching her and her assistant principal snag the signs away from these disrespectful and out-of-control students. It seemed to help. Bishop described confronting the principal of Aliso Niguel. I told her, "You're playing Americans. You're playing dreamers." Bishop told the Orange County Register, "I don't understand the USA pride thing when you score. And if I hear it one more time, I'm walking off the field with the team." School officials removed the offensive signs and are trying to make sense of the controversy. They said they did not intend to allow politics or racism into the game, but we do understand what people may have felt, the principal of Aliso Niguel said. "We have deep respect for Santa Ana High School. We will continue to look into things to further evaluate our event." Progress brings us this last offering here at the Bistro Cafe, part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. This is just so maddening. Babies, toddlers, elementary school kids, junior high school kids, have been held from months to over a year in various facilities spread out over Chicago, run by one company. Federally funded, by the way. We have funds for this. Can't pay teachers unless they are getting paid minimum wage for being, rent-a-cops. At least 99 immigrant children separated from their families and sent to detention facilities in Chicago are dealing with the long-term consequences of the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy, according to a recent investigative report by ProPublica. The report, which cites a number of confidential records from Illinois shelters run by the federally contracted Heartland Human Care Services, details how dozens of children were brought to the shelters after being forcibly removed from their families at the border. The children agonized for weeks over their missing parents, suffering emotional crises, and in some cases, threatening to harm themselves or others as a result. The nonprofit Heartland Human Care Services, which runs 9 different facilities in the Chicago area, has claimed the children have suffered incalculable harm as a result of Trump's zero-tolerance policy. Earlier this summer, amid heavy backlash from human rights groups, Trump rescinded the specific family separation practice through an executive order months after the administration implemented it in May. But the damage, in many cases, had already been done. Now, months after a court ordered the reunification of all separated families, 7 children at the Illinois-based facilities have yet to be reunited, and that's just in the Chicago area. There's scores of other places around the country where the case remains the same. These harsh psychological effects are only made worse by the length of detention, which in the case of some children was more than a year. While the majority of separations took place during the administration's immigration crackdown from April until June of 2018, some Heartland records show the family separations were occurring long before the policy was implemented. One child, a 13-year-old boy from Brazil, was separated from his father while crossing the border in June of 2017. The father was sent to a detention center in El Paso, while his son was sent to a Heartland facility in Chicago, where he remained for over 400 days. Another child, an 11-year-old girl from Guatemala, arrived at a Heartland shelter in late May and was detained for 5 weeks until she was released to family members in South Florida. Her mother, though, remains at a detention center in Texas. She described her loneliness during those 5 weeks in a recent letter to her mother. "I cried during the nights in the shelter," she wrote in Spanish. "I spent all night crying, asking God for us to be together again." Currently, around 400 families remain separated by the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy. Many of those parents were deported after they claim immigration officials tricked them into waiving their rights to reunification, splitting them up from their children indefinitely. It was a feature, not a bug. This was not frontline people just acting on their own. This was policy from on high, and from on high, they need to be punished. Indeed, they will be. All right, let's get to our break. And when we come back, of course, we'll go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Interested in studying exotic life forms? Maybe even identifying new species? Well, forget about buying a plane ticket. Just take a look in your basement, bathroom, or boudoir. Because researchers in North Carolina aim to document the critters that live among us in the great indoors. 10 years ago, biologists led by Rob Dunn at North Carolina State began to explore the biodiversity of insects in 50 homes in the Raleigh area. Though they expected to uncover a couple dozen bugs, they turned up more than 1,000 distinct species. And when they expanded their studies to other cities, they found lots more, some entirely new to science. Now, they're enlisting an intrepid brigade of citizen scientists to carry the work further. That means you. Simply explore your immediate environment. Poke around under the sink, behind the curtains, the back of the pantry, and snap a pic of what you find. Then, upload your images to the social networking app iNaturalist. The observations you post will be shared with a global community of experts who can identify the creepy crawlies you've encountered. To participate in Dunn's effort, just tag your image to his project, which is titled Never Home Alone, The Wildlife of Homes. And if you happen to be in Raleigh on November 15th, pop by the celebration for the publication of the book Never Home Alone, in which Dunn reveals what he and his colleagues have discovered so far. There, Dunn will present the 20 people who identify the most indoor animal species a trophy adorned with a bedbug. Well, not a real bedbug, I assume. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
This is a message from CDC.
After hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods, standing water and excess moisture help mold grow in your home, garage, and other structures. When you return to a home that has been flooded, know that you're likely to have mold. Mold puts your family's health at risk. If you have mold growing in your home, you should clean it up and fix other water problems, such as leaks in roofs, walls, or plumbing. Keep your children and pets out of affected areas until you've cleaned. Control moisture in your home to prevent mold growth. To remove mold growth from hard surfaces, use commercial products, soap and water, or a bleach solution of no more than 1 cup of household laundry bleach in 1 gallon of water. Follow the manufacturer's instructions. Never mix bleach with ammonia or other household cleaners. It will produce dangerous, toxic fumes. Open windows and doors to provide fresh air.
For more information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
You can help stop the Trump agenda in its tracks. Make sure you're registered to vote. Go to rockthevote.org. And on November 6th, vote for Democrats up and down the ticket. This message, a public service from all the fine people of netrootsradio.com.
Who stole Nelson Mandela's spoon? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. In the New York Times, columnist Roger Cohen tells the story of his recent trip to Robben Island off of Cape Town, South Africa, the jail where Nelson Mandela spent the large majority of his more than 1/4 century of imprisonment. On Robben Island, the tourists were brought to see Mandela's cell, where there was a bowl and a cup and a sleeping mat, and that day a rectangle of blue sky, all in a tiny, tiny space, but no spoon. The guide, himself a former prisoner on Robben Island, told the tourists that they were no longer allowed inside Nelson Mandela's cell because some other tourist had stolen Mandela's spoon. It's too bad you can't go inside that cell any longer to experience what it felt like to spend a day, a year, a decade, and another decade, and years after that in that claustrophobic space. It's harder to imagine what that felt like from the outside looking in than from the inside looking out. This year marks the 100th anniversary of Mandela's birth. His was a life that gives us much to celebrate, although today's continued reality of racism and poverty also gives us much to mourn. We don't know who stole Nelson Mandela's spoon, but we can look at news reports and in the mirror to see who is stealing his dream or allowing it to be stolen. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I read the news today, oh boy. It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
Hurricane Florence is barreling toward the East Coast, currently on a path to make landfall on Thursday or Friday morning with dangerous force. Forecasters expect the storm to strengthen in coming days, potentially bringing 150-mile-per-hour winds and deadly flooding from days of torrential rainfall.
Hurricane Florence expected to hit North Carolina Thursday night as a Category 4, and that means sustained winds near 140 miles per hour with higher gusts. Florence is expected to strengthen tonight, possibly to a catastrophic Category 5. Once the storm comes ashore, it is forecast to slow down, likely increasing heavy rain and flooding.
To get a sense of just how strong Florence is, look at the satellite image of the storm out in the Atlantic. Note the smooth, tiny eye at the center of the hurricane. That signifies a very strong, well-organized storm.
Officials in Hawaii have urged residents and visitors to be prepared as Tropical Storm Olivia is expected to drop 15 inches of rain on the island state. Donald Trump's approval rating has slipped in recent polls, adding to the list of electoral concerns Republicans have with 55 days until November 6th. The decline comes after a rough summer at the White House, underscored by blowback over the family separation policy and persistent controversies. In the Real Clear Politics average, the president's approval rating has dropped 2.5 points in 2 weeks, while his disapproval rating has ticked up nearly 2 points. A new CNN survey found Trump's approval plunged 6 points over the past month and hit a new low among independent voters.
Brand new CNN polls revealing how Americans feel about President Donald Trump's time in office, this in the wake of the 1-2 punch to his presidency, the Bob Woodward book, Fear, and the New York Times op-ed penned by an unnamed senior member of his own administration. President Trump's approval rating has now fallen 6 points in just the last month to just 36% approving of the way President Trump is handling his job. The president's favorability rating, a measure of whether people like him or not, has also taken a hit. 61% now say they have an unfavorable view of the president. That is the worst level since Trump was elected. And when it comes to that bombshell New York Times op-ed, a majority, that is 58%, say the author should publicly identify themselves. And 55% think it is appropriate, or rather inappropriate, for an administration official to work against the agenda of the president.
A new Quinnipiac poll finds a majority of American voters believe a host of anonymously sourced allegations that senior aides work behind Trump's back to rein him in. The Republican nominee for governor of Florida, Congressman Ron DeSantis, submitted a letter of resignation Monday to Speaker of the House Paul Ryan, saying he was leaving Congress effective immediately to save taxpayers money while he campaigns for his next job. The Real Clear Politics average of 2 polls taken between August 29th and September 3rd shows Andrew Gillum ahead in the governor's race by 2.5 points. The Trump administration has ordered the closure of the PLO mission in Washington, citing Palestinian leaders' refusal to enter into peace talks with Israel. The Palestinians hit back, accusing the administration of dismantling decades of U.S. engagement. Donald Trump received a, quote, very warm, very positive letter from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un asking for a second meeting, and the White House is looking at scheduling one, according to Press Secretary Sarah Sanders. It's not exactly news that Donald Trump lied in a tweet on Monday, boasting that for the first time in more than a century, America's gross domestic product growth is higher than the unemployment rate. What is surprising is that the administration owned up to it. Kevin Hassett, chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, joined Sarah Sanders at Monday's White House press briefing, which, by the way, was the first one held since August 22nd.
Question for you on an economic stat that the president put out in a comment today. The president said the GDP rate is higher than the unemployment rate for the first time in over 100 years. Mm-hmm. That's just not true, though, is it?
Yeah, that's so I can tell you what is true, and the history of thought. Let me just say that the history of thought of how errors happen is not something that I can engage in because like from the initial fact. To what the president said, that I don't know the whole chain of command. But what is true is that it's the highest in 10 years. And at some point, somebody probably conveyed it to them, adding a zero to that, and they shouldn't have done that. And I could say that at least we numbers geeks here at the White House are grateful and when the press finds mistakes that we make. We don't like making mistakes, but we're grateful when they're pointed out because we want to correct them. And you might have noticed that I gave Sarah a bad number a few weeks ago. It was 100% my fault, and I apologized immediately. We created it, and you'd have to talk to the president about where the number came from, but the correct number is 10 years. And then I said I would come forward. Yeah.
Said President Obama, former President Obama said President Trump would need a magic wand to get to 4% GDP. The president suggested that was a direct quote from President Obama. Did President Obama ever say that?
I don't know. I'm sorry. And again, I'm not the chairman of the Council of Twitter Advisors.
And finally, Tuesday marks the 17th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks when nearly 3,000 people were killed by Al-Qaeda. And that's a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on Tuesday, September 11th, 2018. I'm Mark Boulanger. The General Secretary of the British Trades Union Congress is attacking the rise of right-wing forces in the UK. Francis O'Grady told delegates attending the TUC's annual Congress in Manchester, September 9th to 12th, that the British Labour movement will fight back with all the might of its 6 million members in 50 unions.
Because we've had 10 long years of wage freezes, cuts and austerity. And the stakes are very high. Now, the poet, as people will know, my favourite poet, Seamus Heaney, wrote that when human beings suffer, they get hurt and they get hard. That's what the far right want to exploit. Stirring up division, spreading hate. Some politicians have warned of violence on the streets. Well, I've got news for them. It's already happening. Since the referendum 2 years ago, there's been a shocking rise in attacks by far-right thugs against Muslims and Jewish people, against gay and disabled people, and against migrant workers too. And this isn't the 1930s or the 1970s. This time, they're not just organising on the streets. They're mobilising on Facebook and WhatsApp, aided and abetted by Russian hackers, paid for by American billionaires. And when neo-fascists threaten public order and peace, we don't retreat. We don't let them intimidate us. Our response must be more democracy, not less. And I want to say this. Any self-serving politician who flirts with the far right is playing with fire. Let me be clear. A woman who wears a niqab or a burqa is still our sister. And we defend the right of Muslim women and all women to wear whatever they want. And delegates, here's another prejudice that needs nailing, which I'm fed up about. From the far-right rich men, they claim to champion the interests of blue-collar workers, but they don't. It may suit them to try and stereotype everyone who's white and working class as a racist, but they're wrong. The great majority are decent men and women. Look at the trade union movement. Whatever our nationality, race or religion, we stand together as workers. And we will keep speaking up for common decency. Because this movement's mission is to unite working people And we can stop the far right in its tracks. So here's what we'll do. First, we'll mobilise our members. Trade unions bring people together. We build friendships and communities. There are nearly 6 million of us, and our members are the most powerful force we have. Now, we're not in denial. We know we've got work to do on attitudes about anti-Semitism, immigration, Islam. So we will get behind our workplace reps so they feel confident to counter far-right views and build a bulwark against them.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Remember, just a smidgen of hot Hungarian paprika. Leave the Old Bay in the cupboard. The Hungarian paprika is really all you need. Smoked paprika is even better. All right. Keep the Old Bay in the cupboard. Remember, I keep harping. I apologize. Well, let's begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River on the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently, yes, 51 degrees. It's gotten cooler. The angle of the sun continues to angle. As well, it should, because, hey, it's the cosmic balance that we achieve. Thank God for that. Hey, well, we're partly cloudy right now. We're going to be a bit cooler than yesterday, mid-70s. We were up around low 80s yesterday, and we're going to be cooler. That sounds nice. We'll have an overnight low again in the low 50s, which we had last night. No chance of precipitation for the day. We're going to be partly cloudy, though, throughout the day. Winds are currently about 1 mile, a little bit over 1 mile per hour out of the west-northwest. Will shift out of the northwest and increase to their usual 5 to 10 miles per hour, continuing from out of that direction through the day, through the night, and into tomorrow, where we are expecting a high of, looks like about 70 to 73. Very nice. As I said, no chance for precipitation today, but will increase in a small percentage of possibility of precipitation tonight, and then increasing even more tomorrow. And it looks like we may have a cell of water lingering out over the ocean. A low pressure system just waiting to take out that high pressure system that has been dominating for so long and so terribly. Ragweed pollen is at moderate, and the air quality index is in the good range at 49 parts per million. The daytime UV index is high at 6. High pressure is falling at 29.96 inches. Visibility is about 6 miles, and relative humidity is 80%. All right. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted. These purchased personal weather stations somewhere in their property, and these people positively live around the world. All right. London is 70 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 84 and sunny. Oh, Paris. Rome is 86 and sunny. Oh, Rome. Kiev is 69 and fair. Kabul is 80 degrees and clear. Really bad wedding party weather, folks. Stay out. Stay inside. Don't go out. Please. Hong Kong is 80 degrees and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 69 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and clear. San Francisco, California is 54 degrees and sunny. And New York is 66 degrees Fahrenheit with fall fog. Yeah, that's right. There's a hurricane coming your way, though. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. First offering here at the Chef's Table of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is an article by Steve Usden from the History Network. A Russian vaccine disinformation campaign targeting the U.S. and Western Europe, described in a recent study as part of a chain of Russian and Soviet medical disinformation campaigns that stretches back for decades. During the Cold War, the KGB fanned the flames of conspiracy theories and stories planted in obscure foreign newspapers and disseminated on shortwave radio broadcasts. Russian intelligence has updated its playbook to incorporate Twitter bots and trolls, but the motives and effects have not changed. The Anti-Vax Project, like a global effort in the 1980s that blamed the U.S. military for the AIDS epidemic, is aimed at undermining confidence in democratic institutions and normalizing belief in irrational conspiracy theories. Another thing that has not changed: spreading lies about the causes and treatment of deadly diseases, causes of deaths, and illnesses that could have been prevented. The health of innocents is treated as collateral damage in an undeclared and unnecessary conflict. Russia did not invent the vaccine controversy, but it is adapting it to its own goals. The Internet Research Agency has used the hashtag #VaccinateUS hashtag to send political messages, for example, with tweets like, "At first our government creates diseases, then it creates vaccines. What's next?" The AIDS disinformation campaign of the 80s serves as a template for weaponizing health information and a guide to the likely course and potential impacts of the current vaccine campaign. The operation started on July 17th of 1983 with a letter printed in The Patriot, a low-circulation Indian newspaper that had been set up 2 decades earlier with KGB funds and stayed in business through covert Soviet subsidies. The letter claimed to be from an anonymous American scientist, but was actually written by the KGB. It asserted that AIDS was the result of U.S. military biological warfare experiments. Slipping disinformation into the Patriot was not an unusual tactic. During the Cold War, both the KGB and the CIA co-opted newspapers in the developing world, as well as in European countries including Italy and Greece, as vectors for spreading what today would be called fake news. Compared to the lightning speeds of social media, AIDS disinformation spread glacially. It took 2 years until October of 1985 for the lies in the Patriot letter to be replicated in print. This time in a Moscow newspaper. At that point, something absolutely critical had happened. In the 20th century's version of going viral, hundreds of newspapers and magazines around the world, with no obvious connections to the Soviet government, began reporting an embellishing the story. Dozens of variants appeared, all claiming that AIDS was a deliberate plot or an accidental byproduct of U.S. biological war research. Many pushed the notion that HIV didn't cause the disease and that AIDS drugs were a conspiracy by Big Pharma and the CIA to impoverish and poison poor people in developing countries. And the ideas took hold in the American left. And by allies of Philip Agee, a CIA defector, promoted pseudo-scientific arguments about the provenance of AIDS. In addition to Twitter and Facebook, the Russian government has deployed its television network RT to spread and legitimize messages from anti-vaxxers. While RT has a small audience, its programs are archived on YouTube, where they are only a click away from anxious parents seeking information about vaccine safety. In another departure from the AIDS disinformation campaign, Russia is playing both sides of the controversy, matching vitriolic anti-vax messages with equally blunt pro-vaccine tweets. This makes sense because Russia's goals have nothing to do with vaccines or health. The idea is to tear apart Russia's adversaries by creating false controversies that pit citizens against each other. As more people are drawn into believing in irrational conspiracies, they turn away from the fundamental institutions that are the foundations for democratic societies.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Ryan Gibb of Salon brings us this last offering here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy's Chef's Table. Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. The most frightening infections of the world are not carried by plague-infested rats, rabid dogs, or chimps with Ebola. They're transmitted by superbugs, disease-causing bacteria that cannot be killed by antibiotics. This year, superbugs will kill about 700,000 people, including 23,000 Americans, and really that's all that counts. That toll will increase exponentially in the coming years as ever-evolving bacteria develop resistance to more and more antibiotics. Even hand sanitizers are struggling against certain microbes. By 2050, superbugs could kill 10 million people annually. Fortunately, it's possible to avert this grim future. Bacteriophages, viruses that infect only bacteria, can destroy antibiotic-resistant superbugs. The U.S. government, however, isn't doing enough to facilitate the development of these viruses, and that needs to change. Antibiotics don't work as well as they used to. From 2012 to 2014, the share of bacterial infections resistant to antibiotics rose from 5% to 11%, according to a study by the World Health Organization. Why the spike? For years, doctors doled out antibiotics willy-nilly. Even today, up to half of all prescribed antibiotics are unnecessary or used ineffectively. And whenever antibiotics are used, mutant bacteria survive. And the more the antibiotic is used, the more rapidly bacteria become resistant. No treatments for superbugs are needed, but there have been no major novel antibiotic developments since the 60s. That's why researchers must look beyond antibiotics and devote more resources to novel treatments like bacteriophage therapy. If a patient has a bacterial infection, she could take a cocktail of mini phages in the hope that it will target the infection. The treatment can be modified with different phages if the first cocktail does not work, and phages very rarely produce side effects. Well, let's hope that they can get this tracked down, because we need something to attack these monsters. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. We will be back tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. And Netroots Radio will broadcast on throughout the day for all that breaking news that's breaking right now as we speak. So visit with us tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.